The city never sleeps. But it's not the noise that should keep you awake. It's what hides inside it. Every street has a story. Every hallway remembers something. And some places were never meant to be found. This is Null X Sector, where the ordinary fractures and something else leaks through. Signal return. There is something I want you to consider before we begin. Every message you have ever sent is still out there, not metaphorically, not in the poetic sense that words linger in the air after you speak them. I mean structurally, physically. The data exists somewhere on a server in a building you have never seen, in a city you may never visit, humming quietly in a room kept at exactly the right temperature to preserve it. Your words, your timestamps, your coordinates embedded in the metadata, whether you knew they were there or not. The infrastructure of modern communication was not built to forget. It was built to retain, and to route, and to deliver. And it does all three of those things with a consistency that most people find comforting. Most people have not met Darian Cole. Darian spent his days on rooftops, specifically the rooftops of cell towers, which are not actually on rooftops, but that is how most people picture them. And Darian had long since stopped correcting the mental image, because the correction opened a conversation that he did not usually have the energy for. He was a field technician for an infrastructure contractor that serviced towers across the 5 boroughs in the surrounding counties, which meant that his office was a climbing harness and a tool bag, and the particular view you get when you are 200 feet above the ground, and the city is spread out below you in every direction looking, as it always does from that height, like it was planned, like someone thought it through, like the whole dense, complicated tangle of it was intentional. He knew better. He had been inside the systems that held the city together, literally inside them, pulling cable and replacing hardware and running diagnostics on equipment that had not been touched since the previous technician's visit. And he knew that the city was not planned so much as accumulated. One decision on top of another, each one made by someone who could not see the ones that would come after it, until the whole structure reached a height where nobody fully understood it anymore. And the best anyone could do was maintain the parts they were responsible for, and trust that everyone else was doing the same. Darian was 34 and had been doing this work for 8 years, having drifted into it from a telecommunications degree. He had finished without any particular conviction, and a job at a carrier's retail store that he had left after 14 months because standing in one place all day made him feel like something was wrong with the air. He was the kind of person who needed to be moving, needed the problem to be physical as well as technical, needed to feel the altitude of what he was working on rather than looking at it on a screen from a climate-controlled office. He was good at the work in a quiet way, meaning his supervisors trusted him with the difficult jobs and the older equipment and the sites that had generated more than one complaint. And he did not make a fuss about this, and he did not push for the recognition that might have come with it. And he went home at the end of the day to a 1-bedroom in Astoria and cooked his own meals and read technical journals that most of his colleagues found impenetrable for pleasure. He was not a person who looked for things that were not there. He was a person who was very good at looking at things that were there and understanding what he was seeing. That is why it mattered that it was Darian Cole who saw the pattern. This is relevant. I want you to keep it in mind. Because what happened to Darian Cole began with a malfunction, and what a malfunction is, at its core, is the accumulated weight of a system pressing down on the point where the design ran out of answers. He got the call on a Tuesday in late October, the kind of cold, clear day that the city does twice a year, once in spring and once in fall, when the air has been scrubbed by recent rain, and the light has an edge to it that makes everything look slightly more real than usual. The work order was routine. Tower 7, Foxtrot on the rooftop of a building in the financial district, persistent signal degradation on the upper frequency band, 3 complaints filed by the carrier in the past 2 weeks. Darian arrived at the building at 9 in the morning, signed in with the facility's manager, took the service elevator to the roof, and climbed the tower in about 12 minutes. The equipment was old, not ancient, but the kind of old that suggested it had been on the replacement list for longer than anyone had gotten around to replacing it. He ran his diagnostic sequence and found what he expected, which was a firmware issue compounded by a hardware component that had been operating outside its recommended temperature range for long enough that it had started making decisions the manufacturer had not intended. He made his notes. He documented the issue. He submitted the work order update from his phone while still on the tower, because that was the protocol, and then he climbed down and packed his tools and went to the building's maintenance room to pick up the replacement part he had ordered the previous day. That was when his phone buzzed. A text message. He checked it without particular attention, the way you check a message when you are expecting nothing unusual. The number was not in his contacts. The area code was a New York 212, Old Manhattan, the kind of number that had been assigned before the proliferation of area codes made 212 a relative rarity. The message was 4 words. It said, "You need to leave." Darian looked at it for a moment. Then he typed back, "Who is this?" No response came. He finished retrieving his equipment, signed out with the facility's manager, and walked to his truck. He had forgotten about the message by the time he reached the BQE, because field technicians receive unusual messages regularly, and the human brain is very good at filing things under probably nothing when the day is full and moving. He did not stay filed under probably nothing for long. The second message came 2 days later from a different number, different area code, 718, Outer Boroughs, and again not in his contacts. He was on a tower in Sunset Park when it arrived, so he did not see it until he climbed down, and when he did, he sat in his truck for a moment and read it twice. It said, "The tower on Amsterdam you serviced in August. Go back to it." He had serviced a tower on Amsterdam Avenue in August. He had not told anyone he had serviced it. It was not the kind of information that existed anywhere a stranger could casually access. His work orders were filed in a contractor database that required credentials he had not given to anyone, and the carrier's internal records were not public. And even if someone had wanted to know where he had been on a specific day in August, they would have needed access to at least 2 separate systems to piece it together. He typed back, "Who is this?" Same as before. This time a response came. Not immediately, it took about 90 seconds, and in that 90 seconds Darian sat with his phone in his hand, watching the 3 dots that indicated someone on the other end was composing a message and trying to talk himself into a rational explanation. Wrong number. Some kind of spam that had gotten specific. A coworker with a new phone pulling a strange kind of prank. The response came. It said, "Someone who has been trying to reach you for a long time. The infrastructure is not stable. There is something embedded in the rollout that you are close enough to see if you know where to look. Go back to Amsterdam. Go to the roof. Go at night." Darian stared at his phone for a long time. Then he drove home and made dinner and watched 2 hours of television, and went to bed and lay awake until 2 in the morning thinking about the tower on Amsterdam Avenue and what it had looked like when he serviced it in August, which was ordinary, which was completely and unremarkably ordinary. He went back 3 nights later. The building on Amsterdam was a 12-story residential tower in Washington Heights, the cell equipment installed on a dedicated penthouse-level enclosure that the building's management had leased to the carrier for more per square foot than any of the residential units below it. Darian had a key to the enclosure from the August visit, which he had not yet returned because the return process required a trip to the carrier's offices that he had not gotten around to. He was aware that this was somewhat irregular. He went anyway. The enclosure was exactly as he had left it. He ran his light over the equipment and found nothing that had not been there in August. He was about to leave to go home to decide that this had been a mistake and that the messages were nothing when his phone buzzed again. New number, third one, and the message said, "Not inside, outside, look at the array." He went outside. The antenna array on the south face of the enclosure was standard equipment. He had seen thousands like it, but he stood in front of it in the cold October dark with his flashlight, and he looked at it the way you look at something when you have been told there is something to see, which is differently than you look at something you expect to be ordinary, and after about 30 seconds he found it. There was a pattern in the signal distribution data on his diagnostic tablet that he had logged in August and classified as a calibration irregularity, a cluster of pulses in a frequency band that was not part of the carrier's licensed spectrum. He had noted it in his report. He had flagged it for review. He had received, 2 weeks later, a brief email from someone at the carrier's technical operations team saying the irregularity had been assessed and was within acceptable parameters. He had accepted that and moved on. Standing outside in the dark, he pulled up the August data on his tablet and looked at the pulse pattern with the specific attention of someone who had just been told it was not a calibration irregularity. And what he saw, once he stopped looking at it as noise and started looking at it as signal, made the hair on the back of his neck respond before his brain had processed what he was seeing. It was not random. It had a structure. The intervals between the pulses were not consistent, which was what had made it look like noise in the first place, but they were not inconsistent in a random way. They were inconsistent in the way that language is inconsistent, variable in the specific manner of something that is encoding information rather than generating interference. He had a background in signal processing that went deeper than his current job required, left over from a semester of graduate study he had started and not finished. And what that background was telling him as he stood on the roof of a Washington Heights apartment building at 11 at night was that what he was looking at had the statistical signature of structured communication. He stood on that roof for an hour pulling logs from every tower he had serviced in the past 6 months and running the same comparison, and the pattern was in all of them. Different amplitude, different timing, but the same underlying structure. The same signature appearing in the background of every array he had touched, which meant it was in the background of every array those towers overlapped with, which, given the density of the network and the geography of the 5 boroughs, meant it was in the background of essentially the entire city. He thought about his August report. He thought about the 2-sentence email from the carrier's technical operations team telling him the anomaly was within acceptable parameters. He thought about what it meant that someone with access to that report had written 2 sentences in response to something that warranted, by any rigorous technical standard, considerably more than 2 sentences. He drove home with his hands steady on the wheel, and his mind doing something that was not exactly fear and not exactly excitement, but existed in the space between them, where the most important realizations tend to live. The kind of mental state where you are moving very carefully because you know that whatever you do next is going to matter, and you are not yet sure what the right thing to do is, and you need to think before you act because acting from this particular place without thinking is the kind of mistake you do not always get to correct afterward. The 4th message came the next morning. Different number again, and by now he had stopped being surprised by the numbers and started paying attention to what they were telling him. He had run all 4 through a reverse lookup the night before, which was a thing you could do freely online, and what he had found was that all 4 were disconnected numbers. Numbers that had been deactivated, 3 of them years ago, 1 of them in 2019. Disconnected numbers could not send text messages. This was not a matter of carrier policy. It was a matter of basic infrastructure. A deactivated number had no associated account, no routing path, no mechanism by which a message could be composed and delivered. The system was not designed to allow it, which meant that either the system was doing something it was not designed to do, or something was doing it through the system by a means the system did not understand it was providing. The 4th message said, "Not inside, outside, look at the array." He went outside. The 2 sentences came the next morning. Different number again, and by now he had stopped being surprised by the numbers and started paying attention to what they were telling him. He had run all 4 through a reverse lookup the night before, which was a thing you could do freely online, and what he had found was that all 4 were disconnected numbers. Numbers that had been deactivated, 3 of them years ago, 1 of them in 2019. Disconnected numbers could not send text messages. This was not a matter of carrier policy. It was a matter of basic infrastructure. A deactivated number had no associated account, no routing path, no mechanism by which a message could be composed and delivered. The system was not designed to allow it, which meant that either the system was doing something it was not designed to do, or something was doing it through the system by a means the system did not understand it was provid We have been trying to get this information out for 3 years. The pattern is a language. It has been embedding itself in the network since the first 5G installations in 2020. We do not know if it is communicating with something or building towards something. We know that the people at the carrier who flagged and buried your report in August were told to by someone above them who was told to by someone above them. The trail goes somewhere that we were not able to follow. There is a rooftop. We will send the address. Go there. Bring your tablet. We need you to see what we see. Darian sat with that message for a long time. Then he typed back the question that had been sitting in the center of his chest since the second message. He said, "Who are you?" Not who is sending this. Who are you? The response came faster than any of the others, less than 10 seconds. It said, "People who got too close to this. People who are not able to reach you the way we used to reach people. This is the only channel we have left. Please come." He thought about that for a long time. He thought about the pattern in the logs, which he had spent most of the previous night staring at, and which had not become less structured or less deliberate the longer he looked at it. He thought about the carrier's technical operations team and their 2-sentence email telling him the irregularity was within acceptable parameters. He thought about what it meant that 4 messages had arrived from 4 dead numbers, and that whoever was sending them had known about a specific tower he had serviced on a specific day in August. He thought about what the message meant when it said people who are not able to reach you the way we used to reach people. And then he got in his truck and drove to the address that arrived 11 minutes later. The address was a building in Red Hook, Brooklyn, a converted warehouse that had been partially developed into loft units before the financing had collapsed and left the upper floors unfinished. The rooftop was accessible through a stairwell that someone had left unlocked, whether intentionally or through neglect Darian could not tell. He climbed in the dark with his flashlight and his tablet and the specific feeling of a person who knows they are doing something that does not have a clear exit and is doing it anyway. The roof had a tower. Not a large one. A small installation, the kind a building management company would put in to service its own tenants. Low power, limited range. But it had been modified. Darian could see the modifications immediately because he had spent 8 years looking at this equipment, and the modifications were not subtle to someone who knew what they were looking at. Additional hardware had been attached to the array, components he did not recognize from any manufacturer he had worked with, connected to the existing equipment in a way that suggested whoever had done it understood signal architecture at a level that went beyond standard installation work. The connections were clean, precise, the kind of work that takes knowledge and time, and a specific kind of confidence that comes from not being uncertain about what you are building. He spent 20 minutes examining the hardware before he connected his tablet, and in those 20 minutes he tried to figure out what he was looking at from a material standpoint. The casing on the unfamiliar components was not plastic and not metal, or rather it was not a material he had a precise name for, something with the weight of metal and the surface texture of ceramic and a color that was very slightly wrong in a way he could not specify further than that. It was not dirty. It was not damaged. It was simply a color that did not correspond to any product casing he had seen in 8 years of handling this equipment, and his brain kept sliding off it the way your eye slides off a word that is spelled correctly, but in a font that makes one letter ambiguous. He connected his tablet and ran his diagnostic, and the pattern was there. But here it was not buried in the background. Here it was the entire signal. The modified equipment was not augmenting the tower's normal output. It was using the tower as a vehicle for something else entirely. The pattern was transmitting outward from this point and inward from the city's network simultaneously. And what that meant, as far as Darian could work out standing on a rooftop in Red Hook at 11 at night, was that this location was functioning as a kind of relay, a meeting point between the embedded signal in the network and whatever was receiving it. He thought about how long it would take to install equipment on this roof. He thought about who would have had access to components he had never seen in any supplier catalog. He thought about the message that had told him to come here, and about the other messages, and about the dead numbers, and he asked himself a question that he had been working around all week and could no longer avoid. If the people sending these messages were no longer able to reach him the way they used to reach people, what did that mean? Not in the abstract. Specifically, what had happened to them that had changed how they could communicate? He stood on the roof for a long time with that question before his phone buzzed again. New number, fifth one. The message said, "You can see it now." He typed yes. It said, "The pattern has been in the network for 4 years. It arrived with the infrastructure, not placed by any person or any company. It was in the first hardware that went up and it propagated as the network expanded. The people who noticed it early were told it was interference. Some of them accepted that. Some of them did not. The ones who did not accept it were rerouted, taken off those accounts, reassigned. A few of them tried to go further, and those are the ones sending you these messages." He typed, "What does the pattern say?" A pause, longer than any of the previous pauses. Nearly 4 minutes, and in those 4 minutes Darian stood on the roof and looked out at the city, at the lights of it stretching in every direction, at the towers he could identify from their silhouettes against the sky, all of them transmitting, all of them receiving, the whole invisible architecture of signals and frequencies and data moving through the air above the city like a second city built on the same footprint as the first. The response came. It said, "We do not know. It is a language, but we have not been able to decode it. What we know is that it is not random, and it is not human, and it has been using our infrastructure to say something to something we cannot locate. And we know that the hardware buried in those towers that nobody authorized and nobody can account for is not receiving the signal." Another pause, then a second message from the same number. It said it is responding to it. Darian looked at his tablet. He looked at the pattern on the screen. He thought about the carrier's technical operations team and their careful 2-sentence email. He thought about what it meant to build a system so large and so complex that something could move through it for 4 years without being found. He thought about the modified equipment on this rooftop, components he did not recognize from any manufacturer, connected with a precision that spoke of someone who understood the system from somewhere outside it. He thought about the messages from the dead numbers. He typed, "Are you the ones who modified this roof?" No response came. He looked at the equipment for a long time. Then he typed again. He said, "Are you the ones who put the hardware in the towers?" The screen was still for a moment. Then the 5 dots appeared that meant someone was composing a response. And then the message came, and it was the last one. And it was from a number that, when he ran it later that night, he found had never been assigned to any account by any carrier. A number that existed outside the ranges that had been allocated for use. A number that should not have been able to send a message or receive one or exist in any system that operated on the infrastructure he had spent 8 years maintaining. The message said, "We have been here longer than the infrastructure. We will be here after it. We are not the ones who built anything. We are the ones who found your channel. We are grateful that you are close enough to hear us. There are things moving through your network that you did not put there, and your people at the top of the companies know, and they are not telling you because they do not fully understand it either, and what people do not understand they manage, and what they manage they do not explain. You are one of the ones who can see it. There are not many of you. We needed you to know that what you are seeing is real, that it has a direction, that the direction is not toward anything you need to fear, but it is toward something. And the something is closer than it was 4 years ago when the first tower went up." Darian stood on that roof for a long time after that. He drove home before midnight. He did not call anyone. He did not file a report. He sat in his kitchen and drank a glass of water and looked at the notes he had taken on his tablet, and then he looked out his window at the tower visible from his apartment building, the one he passed every day without thinking about it. Its red warning light blinking in the dark with the steady rhythm of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. He thought about what the message had said about direction. about something being closer than it was 4 years ago. He thought about the language in the signal and the hardware that no manufacturer had made, and the dead numbers delivering messages from people who were no longer able to reach him the way they used to reach people. He thought about what that meant. And in the morning, he went back to work. He climbed his towers. He ran his diagnostics. He filed his reports. He did not mention what he had found in the background of every log, the pattern that was not interference, the signal that had a structure and a direction, and was building towards something that the people at the top of the companies were managing without explaining. He noted it in a private file he kept on a drive that was not connected to his work systems. He added to it every week. He is still adding to it now. I have told you this carefully, and I want to be clear about one thing before I leave you with it. The infrastructure is vast. You move through it every day without thinking about it, which is by design, because a system that requires your constant attention to function is a poorly designed system, and the people who built this one understood that the best architecture is the kind that disappears. The towers, the cables, the frequencies moving through the air you walk through on your way to work. You do not think about them. They are simply there, doing what they do, connecting you to everything and everyone, and processing that connection so efficiently that it feels like nothing at all. I want you to sit with that for a moment, the invisibility of it. The way you move through a city whose entire communication architecture is operating at a level you cannot see or hear or touch, and yet you are inside it every second of every day. Your device pinging towers, the towers logging your position, the network routing your messages through switching stations in buildings you have never noticed, on servers maintained by people like Darian who climb the towers and replace the hardware and file their reports and go home without knowing what they are maintaining. Something else is moving through it. I'm not telling you this to alarm you. I have watched this city accommodate stranger things than a signal it does not understand, and it has always continued. The trains still run. The lights still come on. The people still move through the streets with their specific urgent purposes, and the city receives them all and keeps its own counsel. The city is very good at keeping its own counsel. It has had a long time to practice. But I want you to know what is in the background. I want you to know because I find that the ones who know are more interesting than the ones who do not. More alive, in some sense that I am working to articulate. More present. There is a quality of attention that comes with knowing what moves through the systems you depend on, a quality that I recognize from the long perspective I have on this city and its people. The ones who paid attention to what was underneath the surface, who noticed the things that the city's official version of itself did not account for, who asked the questions that the people at the top of the companies had decided did not need answering. Those people moved differently. They were harder to ignore. And in a city full of people who are not paying attention, the ones who stand out to me the way a light stands out in a window at 3 in the morning. I notice them. Darian Cole is adding to his private file every week. He has found 11 other technicians across the carrier's service area who have flagged the same pattern and received the same 2-sentence response from technical operations. He has found records suggesting that the carrier's parent company retained a consulting group in 2021 to assess what they described internally as anomalous spectral signatures across the rollout footprint, and that the consulting group's final report has never been circulated beyond a 3-person committee at the executive level, and that 2 of the 3 people on that committee have since left the company without explanation. He has not yet been contacted by the entity that sent the final message, the one from the number that had never been assigned to any account. But I think he will be. The signal has been building towards something for 4 years, and the something is getting closer, and the people who are positioned to see it are being found and told what they are looking at, one by one, in the only language that reaches them. Text messages from the dead. That is not a metaphor. I want to be clear about that. The numbers were dead. The accounts were closed. The routing infrastructure that would have been required to send those messages did not exist. And yet the messages were sent and received, and the information in them was precise and accurate, and delivered at exactly the moment it needed to be delivered. Something is using the network to find the people who can hear it. Darian Cole noticed something in the signal, and now something in the signal has noticed Darian Cole. That is where this story begins, actually. Everything before it was just the infrastructure. Some stories end. Others stay with you. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the sector. New reports surface every week, and the city always has more to show you. So subscribe, stay aware, and whatever you do, don't ignore what feels off, because the next story might be yours.